Marrow Central Station had once been the heart of the city. Its grand iron arches rose like the ribs of a giant, stretching high above the bustling concourse. Morning light used to pour through the enormous glass ceiling, scattering in golden sheets across polished stone floors. The air was filled with the sharp blast of train whistles, the shouts of vendors selling newspapers and cigarettes, the murmur of hurried footsteps. Families clung to one another before parting, businessmen checked their watches as they rushed through crowds, and children pointed excitedly at the steam hissing from locomotives ready to depart. That was 10 years ago. Now the station was a corpse. The glass roof had shattered in countless places, leaving only jagged edges that allowed fog and rain to drift inside. Rust had eaten through the iron bones of the arches, staining them a sickly orange. The great clock that once ruled over the concourse stood frozen, its hands locked in place at a meaningless hour, marking the exact moment when time seemed to stop for Marrow Station. The government had sealed it off after the final disaster. Officially, the story was simple: the tracks were unsafe, the building was unstable, the funds to restore it were gone. But everyone in the city knew that wasn't the truth. On the night of the last departure, a train had vanished. Hundreds of passengers boarded in the storm and were never seen again. No wreckage. No bodies. No explanation. Just silence. By dawn, the station was closed, chained, and left to rot. But silence never lasts. Over the years, rumors spread. A farmer swore he had seen pale lights burning behind the boarded windows. A couple walking home late one foggy night claimed they heard the echo of a whistle drifting through the empty streets. Truck drivers who passed at 3 a.m. spoke of figures standing still on the platform, long coats, hats pulled low, faces lost in shadow, waiting for a train that never came. People avoided the area after dark, whispering warnings like prayers: "Don't go near the station. Don't listen if you hear the whistle." Detective Harry Blake had heard the stories. He didn't believe them. 20 years in homicide had taught him that ghosts didn't kill people, people did. Still, he knew better than to ignore rumors. Every story, no matter how strange, grew from a seed of truth. That seed was what he wanted. And so, on this damp, bone-cold night, he stood at the plaza in front of Marrow Station with his partner, Claire Holt. The building loomed over them like a tomb, its massive silhouette swallowed by fog. Street lamps flickered weakly in the mist, their glow stretching only far enough to show broken cobblestones and rain-slick pavement. The gates at the entrance were chained once, but the metal hung twisted now, bent open by some great force. Beyond them, the shattered windows of the station pulsed faintly with a strange light, not steady like electricity, but flickering, shifting, almost breathing. Harry adjusted the collar of his coat against the drizzle, his jaw tightening as he studied the glow. His face, carved with years of cases and sleepless nights, gave nothing away, but Claire saw the tension in his eyes. She gripped her flashlight a little tighter, her breath fogging in the cold air. "This place should be dead," Harry muttered, his voice low. Claire glanced at him. "You think it isn't?" Harry didn't answer. He just stepped forward, the crunch of broken glass beneath his boots echoing in the silence. Claire followed, her eyes darting to the shadows between the iron bars. The faint hum of something unseen drifted from deep inside the station, too soft to place but too steady to ignore. The gates stood before them, rusted and jagged, their hinges groaning as Harry pushed. The sound carried across the plaza like a scream, and for a moment the city behind them seemed to vanish into the fog. What lay ahead was no longer part of the world they knew. Together, the two detectives crossed the threshold. The gates swung shut behind them with a metallic thunder, sealing them inside. The air grew colder. The glow from within stretched across the wet floor like the pulse of something alive. Claire exhaled slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me you hear that." Harry's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. He heard it too, a low, rhythmic sound, faint but unmistakable. The sound of a train. And for the first time in 10 years, Marrow Station seemed to breathe. The heavy gates clanged shut behind them with a hollow echo that seemed to roll endlessly through the cavernous interior. Harry and Claire stood in the entrance hall of Marrow Station, their flashlights slicing through the suffocating darkness. The vast iron ribs of the ceiling arched high above, wrapped in layers of rust and dripping with condensation. Long-dead chandeliers swayed slightly in the stagnant air, their crystal ornaments rattling faintly as if disturbed by a wind that wasn't there. Every sound seemed magnified. The crunch of glass beneath their boots echoed like gunfire, while the scrape of Harry's coat against his leg felt impossibly loud. Somewhere above them, in the blackness of the mezzanine, came the faint creak of shifting weight, as if someone, or something, was moving just out of sight. The grand departure board still hung in the center of the hall. Its surface was cracked, its letters broken and half-fallen, but one fragment of a word remained, flickering faintly in the beam of Claire's light, D.E. Departure. Delay. Or something that never had the chance to finish. The incomplete word seemed like a cruel joke, a message left hanging in the air for those foolish enough to enter. Claire's steps slowed as her flashlight passed over the ticket counters, their glass windows shattered, their wooden frames rotting. Scattered across the floor were dozens of old tickets, damp and half-disintegrated, their ink bled into unreadable smudges. She crouched and picked one up, noticing that the back was not blank. Instead, someone had scrawled a rough symbol in charcoal, a circle crossed by two jagged lines. She slipped it into her notebook without a word. Harry had noticed something else. Near the center of the floor, the dust was disturbed, long drag marks, deep grooves carved into the stone as though something heavy had been pulled through the hull. The lines were irregular, as if the object fought against being moved. They led straight across the marble tiles toward the far end of the station, where a set of steel doors hung slightly ajar. The smell was stronger here, rust, oil, and beneath it all, a faint metallic tang, like blood left too long in the open air. "Someone's been here," Harry said, his voice low, the certainty in his tone making the silence feel heavier. Claire looked up at the mezzanine again. The sensation of being watched gnawed at her, as though unseen eyes tracked their every step. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, a sound rolled through the dark, faint at first, then sharper. Clang. Metal striking stone. The noise echoed down from the tunnel doors, followed by the dragging scrape of chains. Claire tightened her grip on her notebook. "Harry." The detective swept his flashlight toward the steel doors. The beam caught scratches along their surface, long gouges carved deep into the metal. They weren't old, the edges were sharp and clean. Someone, or something, had clawed at the doors with desperate force. The doors themselves stood ajar, opening into a darkness far denser than the hall behind them. From the gap spilled a faint, irregular glow, like firelight breathing in and out. It painted the floor with pulsing shadows, as though the tunnel beyond was alive. Harry's instincts screamed a warning. Everything about this place felt wrong, too wrong. And yet he knew they would go forward. They always did. "Stay close," he said, his voice quiet but steady. Together, they followed the drag marks, step by step, into the waiting dark. The station swallowed them whole. Once inside, the fog felt thicker, the air heavier, as though the building itself was alive and exhaling through its broken glass lungs. The echoes of their footsteps did not return in the usual way, instead, they spread outward, bending and twisting, until it sounded like someone else was walking just behind them, mimicking every move. Harry's flashlight beam slid across the walls, catching fragments of a life that no longer existed. A rusted trolley overturned on its side. Suitcases stacked in a corner, split open, their contents reduced to mold and dust. A child's doll lay face down on the tiles, its porcelain head cracked into a crooked smile. Claire paused there, staring at it longer than she should have. "This place is wrong," she whispered. Harry didn't answer. He already knew. They followed the narrow corridor that led deeper toward the central platforms. With every step the sound of machinery grew stronger, the low, rhythmic pulse of pistons, the metallic groan of iron under pressure. It was impossible, yet undeniable. Something was alive down there. When they finally stepped onto the first platform, the world seemed to shift. The fog wasn't just drifting anymore, it coiled and clung, rolling across the floor like a living thing. The station stretched out in front of them, endless rows of arches vanishing into shadow. The tracks gleamed wet under the faint orange glow of a single hanging lamp. Beyond that, the darkness was absolute. Claire lifted her light toward the rails. "Harry, look." Dragged across the gravel and steel were deep grooves, recent ones, like something heavy had been pulled down the line. The marks disappeared into the mist, swallowed whole. Harry's chest tightened. Whatever came in here, it's still here. Then came the whistle. It was faint, at first, a soft, mournful note, as if carried from miles away. But it grew louder, clearer, until it filled the chamber with a sound no one in Marrow City should have heard for a decade. The whistle of a train arriving. Claire's eyes widened. No tracks have been active for 10 years. There's nothing left to run on. And yet, the vibration under their boots told another story. The floor trembled. Dust fell from the arches above. The platform shivered with the weight of something immense moving closer. The glow at the far end of the station grew brighter, flickering like the headlamp of an oncoming engine. Harry grabbed Claire's arm. "Stay sharp." But there was something wrong about the light. It wasn't steady, it pulsed, irregular, almost organic. Like a heart beating. And as it drew nearer, Harry realized the sound behind the whistle wasn't just the roar of wheels. It was layered with something else. Voices. Low, guttural voices chanting in unison. Words neither of them could understand, but heavy with rhythm, like a ritual spoken in steel and smoke. Claire stumbled back, her notebook nearly falling from her hand. "That's not a train." The glow swelled, and the shadows stretched long across the platform. For a moment, Harry thought he saw figures standing on the tracks, dozens of them, motionless, like passengers waiting for their ride. Their faces were pale blurs in the fog, their forms wavering as if made of smoke. The rumble grew deafening. The whistle screamed. And then, just as suddenly, silence. The light vanished. The platform was empty again. The fog hung still and heavy. Claire's breath shook in her throat. It stopped. Harry's instinct screamed that it hadn't. He could feel it still, lurking, watching, waiting just out of sight. The station wasn't abandoned. It was listening. He turned to Claire, his face pale beneath the dim glow of the lamp. "We're not investigating a crime scene anymore. We've stepped into something else entirely." Before she could respond, a faint metallic clatter echoed down the tracks, like a chain being dragged across steel. Then another. Closer. And from the fog at the end of the platform, 2 pinpricks of light sparked to life. Not headlights. Eyes. The further they moved into the station, the more the air thickened, heavy with the smell of damp stone, rust, and something older, like ashes that had never cooled. The distant hum of machinery echoed faintly through the corridors, though the place had no power, no living soul to maintain it. Each step seemed to pull them deeper into the marrow of a body that had been dead for a decade yet somehow refused to rot. Claire ran her fingers along the cracked walls, tracing deep grooves that seemed too deliberate to be simple decay. Some looked like claw marks, others like symbols gouged into the plaster with a steady, merciless hand. She scribbled them into her notebook, her brow furrowed. "These aren't vandalism," she whispered. "They look older than the station itself." Harry didn't answer. He was listening. Not just with his ears, but with the sharpened instinct of a man who had stood in too many crime scenes where silence meant danger. Somewhere ahead, beneath the hollow weight of fog and stone, something pulsed like a heartbeat, steady, mechanical, wrong. They emerged into what had once been the central concourse. The vast hall stretched before them, broken windows letting in shafts of moonlight that fractured in the fog. Rusted benches sat like gravestones in neat rows. The giant clock above the hall loomed, its hands unmoving at 2:47 a.m., the same time marked on the broken watch they had found. Claire's gaze lingered on it, unease tightening her chest. "It's like time stopped with the trains," she murmured. Harry swept his flashlight across the expanse, and the beam landed on something that made his throat tighten. The tracks. They weren't empty. Steel rails gleamed faintly as if freshly polished, stretching into the darkness where the fog seemed to thicken into a wall. And on the platform, abandoned luggage sat neatly in a row, suitcases, trunks, even a child's small leather satchel. Each one was marked with a faint chalk symbol. Circles. Triangles. Crossed lines. Claire crouched beside them, sketching quickly. They were left intentionally. This isn't random. Harry's jaw tightened. Passengers don't just leave their lives behind in order. The low hum surged again, deeper now, vibrating through the soles of their boots. Claire pressed a hand to the ground. "It's coming from the rails." Then, as if to answer, the fog beyond the tracks shivered and split. A dull orange glow bled through, flickering like firelight but rhythmic, pulsing in time with the mechanical hum. And with it came a sound that should not have been possible, the slow, deliberate screech of metal wheels dragging along rails. Claire's breath hitched. "Harry, there's no train." "There can't be." But Harry's eyes stayed fixed on the darkness, his face a mask carved from stone. "Tell that to whatever's moving out there." The glow grew brighter, swelling, stretching across the length of the platform as the sound intensified, the unmistakable arrival of a locomotive. And yet, nothing appeared. No outline, no mass of iron or steel. Just the hiss of steam, the grinding of gears, the electric hum that rattled their bones. Then came the voices. Faint at first, then rising like a chorus through the fog. Dozens of them, layered over one another, speaking in languages neither of them fully understood. Some whispered. Others pleaded. And a few shouted with such rage that the words became nothing but violent echoes. Claire stumbled back, clutching her notebook to her chest, her face pale. They're on the platform. Harry swung the flashlight, its beam cutting through the haze. For the briefest second, shapes flickered into view, outlines of figures standing in rows, their faces blurred, their eyes black hollows waiting. Silent. Watching. The light sputtered, dimmed, then flared back. And the figures were gone. Silence crashed over the station, broken only by the slow ticking of water dripping from the ceiling. Claire's hands trembled as she forced herself to keep writing, each note jagged and uneven. "It's a schedule," she muttered. "This station, it still runs on one." Harry turned his gaze back to the tracks, where the glow had already begun to fade, pulling its weight back into the fog. He didn't believe in ghosts. But he believed in what he had seen. And more importantly, he believed in what came next. The train hadn't arrived. Not yet. It was still on its way. The deeper Harry and Claire moved into the belly of Marrow Station, the more the building shed its ghostly aura and revealed something far more tangible, and far more dangerous. The flickering lights that had seemed spectral from a distance were nothing more than jury-rigged generators strung together with old cabling. The low hum that resembled the growl of a phantom train was the vibration of hidden machinery running behind the walls. The truth lay not in the supernatural, but in the deliberate hand of men. They passed through a service corridor littered with fresh footprints and dragged crates. The air was warmer here, alive with the faint smell of oil and diesel. Claire ran her hand along the wall, stopping when she felt the vibrations pulsing faintly through the brick. "There's something running under us," she whispered. Harry's jaw clenched. Engines. Moments later they found the source. Beyond a rust-stained door, in what had once been the old maintenance hub, the abandoned station bloomed with illicit life. A makeshift workshop filled the cavernous space. Portable floodlights blazed overhead. Generators rattled. Half-disassembled freight cars squatted on the side rails like gutted beasts. And scattered across tables and crates was evidence too damning to ignore: weapons, counterfeit documents, bundles of unmarked bills. It wasn't a ghost that haunted Marrow Station. It was a smuggling ring, using the forgotten tunnels and sealed lines as the perfect cover. Claire's flashlight swept across maps pinned to the wall. Hidden routes ran like veins through the city, lines connecting safehouses and drop points. She stepped closer, tracing one with her finger. They've been running contraband right under the city. 10 years of silence, and they turned this place into their private railway. Harry examined a stack of crates near the wall, prying one open with his knife. Inside, wrapped in burlap, were bricks of narcotics. His expression hardened. This explains the whispers. Keeps people away. The ghost stories are smoke. The real train never left, it was theirs. A noise broke the silence, the scrape of boots on stone. Both detectives froze. From the shadows of the far corridor, men emerged, armed and startled to find intruders. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Harry's voice was low, even. "Police. Drop them." The response was a curse, then the metallic snap of rifles being raised. The standoff shattered in an instant. Gunfire cracked through the hollow station. The detectives dove for cover behind a steel workbench. Sparks leapt as bullets chewed into the machinery. Claire fired back, forcing the smugglers to scatter. Harry grabbed a radio unit from the table, smashing it against the floor to kill their communications. "We can't hold them long," he shouted. "We cut them off from the tunnels." The fight surged down the maintenance hall, into the echoing platforms beyond. Shadows leapt and fractured under the harsh white lights. The smugglers knew the ground better, but Harry and Claire were seasoned hunters. Step by step, round by round, they forced the men back. A final burst of gunfire echoed, then silence. When the smoke cleared, several of the gang lay subdued, weapons skittered across the floor. The others fled into the night, abandoning their crates. Claire cuffed the nearest conscious man, her hands steady despite the adrenaline. "That's the end of your ghost train," she muttered. Harry straightened, breathing hard, his coat scorched and dusted with plaster. For a long moment he looked around the ruined hall, the rusted tracks, the broken arches, the shattered glass high above. The old station was bleeding history and crime both. But now, at last, it was silent. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Back up. The city would know soon enough what had truly haunted Marrow Station. No phantoms, no cursed trains, only men, greed, and lies. Harry's gaze settled on the great clock above the concourse, its hands still frozen at 2:47. He exhaled, slow and final. "Time's up." Beside him, Claire nodded, exhaustion etched across her face but tempered with resolve. "We'll seal it for good this time." And together, as the heavy doors of the station swung open to admit the arriving officers, the two detectives walked out into the fog, leaving behind a myth and exposing the truth. The station would never breathe again.